Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something quietly horrifying. What it took to be beautiful in medieval times. Shaved foreheads, poisonous makeup, bleeding gums from whitening powders, and if you aged, spoke out, or didn't fit the mold, you were ugly, or worse, a witch. These weren't just beauty tips, they were rules, traps, and for many women, death sentences in disguise. Before we start, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it? I love seeing how far this tribe of midnight minds stretches. Now get cozy, dim the lights, and let's uncover the brutal cost of being beautiful. The idea of beauty has been at the heart of human societies for centuries, but in the Middle Ages it evolved into something far more complicated than simply looking attractive. Beauty in this era was not just about physical appeal, it was an expression of one's inner qualities, class status, religious purity, and even survival. Beauty standards were deeply intertwined with religious beliefs, social status, and the prevailing scientific understanding of the time. In the early Middle Ages, beauty was often viewed through a religious lens. The church held an immense influence over people's lives, shaping not only their spiritual beliefs, but also their views on personal appearance. Saints and holy figures were depicted in art and religious texts as the epitome of beauty, not because of their physical attractiveness, but due to their divine purity. The medieval concept of beauty was, therefore, not centered on the human form, but on virtues such as chastity, piety, and the absence of sin. The Christian view of beauty, heavily influenced by the teachings of the Church, focused on modesty and humility. This is evident in the way women, in particular, were expected to behave and present themselves. A woman's beauty was often tied to her ability to reflect divine favour. A well-dressed woman who appeared elegant in her simplicity was seen as embodying the ideal of Christian purity. Excessive adornment was discouraged, as it was seen as a form of vanity that distracted from spiritual values. Clothing was often plain and conservative, with modest dresses and veils that covered the hair and body. However, despite this emphasis on modesty, beauty still mattered, especially in the royal courts and noble circles. Here, beauty became a reflection of one's social and political standing. Kings and queens, nobles and knights were expected to maintain their appearance as a sign of their status. The royal court was the epicenter of beauty culture, where the ideal standards of beauty were forged. In these circles, the relationship between beauty and power became apparent. The wealthy were able to afford luxurious clothing, elaborate hairstyles, and expensive cosmetics, which became a symbol of their high status and divine right to rule. But even within these circles there were restrictions. Beauty was still a way of showing devotion and religious adherence. The origins of medieval beauty ideals can be traced back to the classical influences of ancient Greece and Rome. Though the Roman Empire had long fallen by the time the medieval period began, the ideals of classical beauty, smooth skin, well-proportioned bodies, and symmetrical faces still resonated through the arts and architecture. These ideas were not immediately embraced by the early medieval period, which was a time of relative instability and chaos in Europe. Yet as the centuries passed, classical notions of beauty slowly seeped back into the cultural consciousness, particularly in the Renaissance, but their early roots were planted in the medieval era. During this time, beauty also became a matter of surrounding. Hygiene and health played a pivotal role in one's appearance, particularly for those who lived in the lower classes. The harsh realities of medieval life, poor living conditions, limited access to medical care, and constant threat of disease meant that physical beauty was closely linked to the ability to survive. In many ways, a person's outward appearance was a sign of their ability to endure the challenges of medieval existence. Those with clear skin, bright eyes, and healthy hair were often viewed as fortunate, blessed even by God. Conversely, those with scars, blemishes, or illnesses were often stigmatized. For the lower classes, beauty was often connected to health. Medieval peasants who lived in small villages or rural areas could not afford cosmetics, fine clothing, or elaborate hairstyles. Instead, they were judged by their overall health and the condition of their skin, hair, and teeth. Medieval medical texts of the time reveal that many believed physical imperfections, such as warts, birthmarks, or scars, were signs of evil or sin. These imperfections could cause social exclusion, particularly for women. Women's bodies were expected to be flawless, or at least their flaws had to be hidden. The concept of beauty was also tied to morality. The Church taught that outward beauty was a reflection of the soul's purity. The idea was that if a person's appearance was attractive, it was because they were morally virtuous, A beautiful person was often assumed to be a good person. This connection between beauty and morality was particularly evident in the way the church viewed women. If a woman appeared too extravagant, too elaborate in her dress, or too openly sexual in her behaviour, she was seen as sinful. Her beauty became a temptation, leading others astray from the path of righteousness. Religious leaders and clerics frequently denounced women's vanity, claiming that excessive adornment and concern for one's appearance were distractions from the more important pursuits of faith and piety. In this environment, beauty was both a blessing and a curse, depending on how it was presented. A woman's beauty could either elevate her standing or lead to her ruin. A woman like Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most beautiful and powerful women of her time, could use her beauty to her advantage in court politics, while a woman whose beauty led her to become the object of desire might find herself in dangerous and compromising situations. Despite the religious emphasis on modesty, certain physical features were consistently considered attractive. For example, long hair was considered one of the most desirable traits for women in the medieval Europe. In many medieval texts and art, women were depicted with long flowing locks, often adorned with flowers or jewelled headpieces. This was not just an aesthetic choice, but also a symbolic one. Long hair was associated with femininity, fertility, and beauty, and was often seen as a gift from God. However, there were strict rules regarding how long hair could be worn in public. It was often required that women wear veils or head coverings to maintain their modesty. One of the most remarkable aspects of medieval beauty standards was their connection to wealth and class. For the rich and powerful, beauty was a tool of political advantage. Beautiful women were often married off to powerful men as part of political alliances, while handsome men were expected to maintain their appearance as a symbol of their noble lineage. The wealthy could afford luxurious perfumes, expensive fabrics, and intricate jewellery, all of which were used to signal their high status and divine favour. But for the poor, beauty was not about adornment. It was about survival and maintaining a healthy, blemish-free appearance to prove that they were worthy of respect and honour. Yet, despite the importance placed on beauty, many medieval people didn't necessarily strive for the unattainable ideals we might think of today. While there were those who tried to achieve the perfect look, many were simply trying to stay alive in a world where diseases, famine, and wars were ever present. And while beauty was certainly a reflection of social class, it also reflected something deeper, an attempt to survive in a world that didn't always care whether you were beautiful, as long as you could prove your worth. But what happened to those who didn't conform to the standards of beauty? What did it mean for those whose physical appearance did not align with the prevailing ideals? The story of beauty in the medieval world is not just one of aesthetics, it is one of power, class, and survival. As we move forward, we will uncover the lives of those who struggled with these standards and explore how beauty could both uplift and destroy lives in equal measure. As we continue to explore the origins of medieval beauty standards, it becomes clear that beauty in the Middle Ages was not a mere frivolous pursuit. It was tied to survival, power, and social structure. But beauty in the medieval world wasn't just about conforming to ideals of what looked good. It was about fitting within a rigid societal hierarchy, where beauty had a different meaning for different people. The pursuit of beauty, while seemingly innocuous, came at a high cost for many, particularly for women, and even more so for those who did not belong to the aristocracy. In the early Middle Ages, beauty was largely an external reflection of one's class, and the ruling elite were the primary enforcers of this notion. For the rich and powerful, the act of adhering to beauty standards went beyond personal appearance. It was a statement of wealth, power, and divine favour. Nobility had the means to maintain their beauty, with access to the finest clothing, perfumes, and cosmetics. Wealthy women used expensive oils, aromatic powders, and creams to smooth their skin and reduce the appearance of imperfections. These luxurious beauty products were often imported from distant lands and were beyond the reach of the common folk. For the wealthy, beauty could serve as a form of social capital. A woman who maintained her beauty could use it to secure advantageous marriages, strengthen political alliances, or simply maintain her social standing. Royalty and the noble classes were often depicted in art and literature as paragons of physical beauty, with their flawless complexion, bright eyes, and graceful features. These ideals were replicated in courtly behaviour, where beauty became an asset that could be traded. A beautiful woman was not just a figure of attraction, but a tool of power, used to cement alliances or maintain royal bloodlines. However, beauty's role was not just as a symbol of wealth and power, it also reflected one's adherence to the moral and religious codes of the time. For women, beauty was a dual-edged sword. While it could enhance their social standing, it could also lead to their downfall if they were seen as overly concerned with their appearance or too sensual. The Church had long promoted the idea that a woman's beauty should reflect her inner virtue, her purity, modesty, and devotion. A beautiful woman who was not seen as virtuous was subject to moral judgment and societal scorn. In this respect, beauty was not just about the body, but about one's moral and spiritual purity, and this created a constant tension for women. This tension between physical beauty and moral character was especially evident in the way society viewed women who dared to flaunt beauty standards. Women of the lower classes, who could not afford to cover up their beauty with layers of clothing and makeup, often struggled to meet the same ideals. For them, beauty was a sign of fertility and health, but it was also linked to their value as women. Beautiful peasant women could sometimes secure better marriages or improve their social standing, but their beauty was also seen as a tool to attract male attention and increase their chances of survival. In this way, beauty became a necessity for women who lived in impoverished conditions. They had to make the most of what they had, as their appearance was often their most valuable asset. For the men of the medieval world, beauty had a different significance. While they were not subjected to the same level of scrutiny as women, medieval men were still expected to maintain their appearance. Handsome men were often seen as symbols of strength, honour, and virility. Much like women, they were expected to wear fine clothing and maintain a groomed appearance. However, men's beauty was more directly linked to their social status and physical prowess. Knights, for instance, were often celebrated for their handsome looks and strong athletic bodies. The image of the knight as a beautiful, almost otherworldly figure was perpetuated through literature and art, where knights were depicted as paragons of both virtue and beauty. This ideal was linked to the medieval concept of chivalry, where the physical appearance of a knight was seen as a reflection of his inner nobility and honour. Despite the emphasis on beauty in the elite classes, the common people had a far more complicated relationship with beauty. For peasants, beauty was not about elaborate adornments or luxury, it was about health, survival, and fertility. Peasants were not concerned with achieving the idealized beauty standards of the nobility, but rather with maintaining an appearance that reflected their ability to endure the harsh conditions of medieval life. A well-kept, healthy appearance was considered a sign of good health, which was vital in a time when disease, famine, and poor sanitation were constant threats. In these communities, a woman who appeared healthy and well-nourished was more likely to attract a suitable marriage partner, ensuring the survival of her family and children. However, for many this was not a simple task. The medical understanding of beauty in the Middle Ages was rudimentary at best. Diseases, such as smallpox, leprosy, and the plague, often left permanent scars on the skin, which were considered both disfiguring and a sign of divine punishment. The poor were particularly vulnerable to these diseases, and for them, beauty could be an elusive goal. Scars, pockmarks, and other physical imperfections were often viewed with suspicion, leading to social stigma and exclusion. Those who could not afford to heal these blemishes with expensive treatments were left with little recourse but to live with their imperfections, often facing ridicule or exclusion from higher social circles. The obsession with beauty also had a darker side. In an era where beauty was seen as a reflection of moral purity, those who deviated from the idealized standards of the time were often subjected to harsh judgment and punishment. Women who were considered too beautiful or too seductive were sometimes accused of witchcraft or immoral behaviour. This was especially true in periods of social unrest or during times of religious persecution. A woman's beauty could be used as evidence against her if she was suspected of wrongdoing, and many women throughout history were tortured or executed because their beauty made them a target for such accusations. In addition to these social and religious pressures, there was also a constant struggle with physical limitations. Beauty in the medieval world was not just about appearance, but about achieving perfection, something that was practically impossible for most people. The idealized features, smooth skin, bright eyes, long hair, and a slender body, were traits that few could attain naturally, and those who could were often the recipients of envy and disdain. The average person, regardless of class, simply could not afford the time, resources, or luxury to achieve the unattainable standards of beauty that were set by the elite. But beauty was not just a matter of physical appearance, it was also a matter of self-perception. For many medieval people, beauty was something that could be moulded or improved through external means. Cosmetics, perfumes, and elaborate hairstyles were used to cover imperfections or enhance physical features. However, these efforts were not always successful, and many people lived in constant fear of being judged for their appearance. The fear of being seen as unattractive, unhealthy, or morally impure weighed heavily on the minds of medieval men and women alike. This fear became a driving force behind the relentless pursuit of beauty, a pursuit that was often unattainable for most. In the end, medieval beauty standards were far more than just superficial ideals. They were deeply intertwined with the social, political, and religious fabric of the time. For the wealthy, beauty was a tool of power and influence. For the poor, it was a matter of survival. And for women, it was both a blessing and a curse, a reflection of their moral purity, social status, and ability to conform to the rigid expectations of society. Beauty in the medieval world was not simply an individual pursuit. It was a reflection of the larger forces that shaped society, and the cost of perfection was often too high to bear. As we reflect on the impact of these beauty standards, it becomes clear that they were not just a product of the medieval period. The legacy of these ideals continues to influence our perceptions of beauty today. But what did the pursuit of medieval beauty really cost those who lived through it? Was it worth the sacrifices, the moral judgments, and the physical toll? And how does this historical pursuit of beauty relate to our modern understanding of appearance and identity? The pursuit of beauty in the medieval era, while deeply rooted in cultural and religious traditions, had far-reaching consequences for those who adhered to its rigid standards. While some were able to harness beauty as a means of gaining power, wealth, and prestige, others faced immense personal and social costs. Beauty in the Middle Ages was a tool of survival for some, but a double-edged sword for others. The pressure to conform to these ideals led to numerous societal issues, from the marginalization of the less fortunate to the dangerous consequences for women who failed to meet these expectations. But as we reflect on this era, we must ask, what lasting impact did these beauty standards leave on the generations that followed? And what lessons can we draw from them today? At the core of medieval beauty standards was the belief that beauty was inherently tied to one's moral and social worth. This belief was reinforced by the Church, which taught that physical beauty reflected one's spiritual purity. For women in particular, beauty was seen as both a reflection of their inner virtue and their ability to conform to society's expectations of modesty and chastity. Women who deviated from these ideals, whether by their appearance or their behaviour, were often deemed sinful or immoral. The Church's teachings emphasised that beauty could not be separated from virtue. Women who flaunted their beauty in ways that were considered inappropriate, through excessive adornment, sensual behaviour, or open sexual allure, were condemned for their vanity and worldliness. For the peasant women who could not afford the costly beauty treatments of the upper classes, beauty became a much more functional matter. It was not about flaunting one's wealth but ensuring health and fertility, essential for the survival of their families. Beauty, in this context, was about being healthy enough to bear children and manage the demanding work of rural life. If a woman's skin was clear and her body appeared robust, it was seen as a sign that she had the vitality necessary to contribute to the well-being of the household. However, for the peasants, even a slight imperfection could result in harsh judgments. A woman with visible scars, acne, or blemishes, often from disease or malnutrition, could be seen as unfortunate or unworthy. Even though these features were often beyond her control, this harsh judgment of physical imperfections extended beyond women to men as well. While men were not as closely scrutinized for their appearance as women, they still had to adhere to certain standards of beauty, particularly if they were part of the nobility. The knightly code, for example, celebrated strength, health, and handsomeness as markers of a man's worth. This created a parallel pressure for men to uphold a certain standard of beauty, particularly in the courts and during times of war. A knight who was considered unattractive or unkempt was often seen as lacking in discipline or honour. Beauty, thus, was not just about external aesthetics, it was a reflection of one's internal moral fibre and social standing. However, as we have seen, these standards were far from attainable for the majority of people. Most peasants could not afford the time and money or resources necessary to meet the idealised standards of beauty set by the elite. For them, beauty was a luxury that could only be dreamed of, and even the effort to attain it often came with personal and societal costs. Those who tried to conform to the beauty ideals of the time, often at great personal expense, faced the harsh reality of living in a world that prioritised appearance over substance. The physical toll on the body, especially for women, was immense. Tight corsets, excessive hair removal, and the constant pressure to maintain a youthful appearance left many with physical ailments that affected their long-term health. Yet despite these challenges, medieval beauty standards were deeply ingrained in the fabric of society. They shaped not only the way people looked at themselves, but also the way they were viewed by others. Those who conformed to the standards were often rewarded with power, status, and influence, while those who could not, or would not meet these ideals were relegated to the margins. But what impact did this have on society as a whole? Was beauty merely a tool of social control, or was it something more? In examining the legacy of medieval beauty standards, we can see that the consequences of this obsession with appearance reverberated far beyond the Middle Ages. The medieval period laid the groundwork for the beauty ideals that would continue to shape society in the centuries that followed. In many ways, the standards of beauty that emerged in the Middle Ages continue to influence modern perceptions of attractiveness. From the Renaissance to the present day, the pursuit of beauty has remained a dominant force in human culture, often dictating not only how we look, but how we live, how we love, and how we value ourselves and others. In the modern world, the beauty industry has grown into a multi-billion-dollar industry that influences everything from fashion to advertising, social media, and self-esteem. While the ideals of beauty have evolved, they are still influenced by many of the same principles that dominated the medieval period: youth, smooth skin, slenderness, and symmetry. Modern beauty standards, particularly for women, continue to emphasize unattainable ideals, and the pressure to conform to these standards has led to widespread dissatisfaction with one's appearance, eating disorders, and body dysmorphia. Yet, as we reflect on the impact of medieval beauty standards, we must also consider the ways in which these ideals were challenged and reshaped. In medieval society, beauty was often a means of survival and social mobility for the wealthy. But for the majority of the population, it was a source of constant anxiety and strife. The pressure to conform to impossible standards was not only damaging to the individuals who tried to achieve them, but also reinforced societal divisions that were based on class, gender, and power. Today, while many of these pressures persist, there has been a growing recognition of the need to break free from rigid beauty ideals. The body positivity movement, for example, challenges traditional notions of beauty by celebrating diversity in body types, skin tones, and facial features. In doing so, it seeks to dismantle the harmful effects of beauty standards that have plagued societies for centuries. But as we continue to challenge these norms, we must ask, can we ever fully escape the legacy of medieval beauty standards, or do they continue to shape our perceptions of ourselves and others in ways we may not fully understand? The pursuit of beauty in the medieval world, while seemingly distant, holds important lessons for us today. It reminds us of the dangers of a society that values appearance above all else, and the importance of recognizing beauty in its many forms. As we reflect on the medieval ideals of beauty, we are reminded of the importance of embracing our own unique features and rejecting the unattainable standards that have defined beauty for centuries. Beauty, after all, is not a uniform ideal, but a deeply personal and cultural experience, one that continues to evolve and one that we must learn to appreciate for its diversity and complexity. As we conclude this story, it is clear that the pursuit of medieval beauty was far from a simple quest for physical perfection. It was a complex and often painful journey that shaped the lives of those who lived through it. The legacy of these standards continues to affect how we perceive beauty today, but the lessons we can draw from this history can guide us toward a more inclusive and realistic understanding of what it means to be truly beautiful. In medieval Europe, the body was viewed as both a vessel for the soul and a reflection of one's spiritual and social status. The concept of beauty was intrinsically tied to health, but the relationship between the two was far more complicated than simply looking attractive. Medieval people believed that health and beauty were intertwined, with the body often viewed as a microcosm of the universe. Imbalance in one's body was seen as a reflection of moral or spiritual imbalance, and conversely, good health was often equated with a virtuous life. But how did medieval people view the body in terms of beauty and hygiene, and what did they do to maintain it? During the early medieval period, there was little understanding of hygiene as we know it today. Disease and illness were common, and the medieval worldview often interpreted these health problems in supernatural or moral terms. The Church's influence on medieval life was profound, and it shaped how people thought about their bodies. The belief that the body was a vessel for the soul meant that physical health was tied to spiritual health. This created an environment where people tried to maintain a pure body in order to reflect a pure soul. However, the means of maintaining health and beauty were rudimentary at best, and the methods employed often led to further health problems rather than solutions. In terms of beauty, there were certain physical features that were universally admired: clear skin, smooth hair, and a strong, healthy body. But how could one achieve such a body when diseases like smallpox, leprosy, and the plague were rampant, and the general understanding of health was limited? The answer lay in the medieval practice of balancing the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. This was a fundamental concept in a medieval medicine, and it was believed that a person's beauty and health depended on the proper balance of these humours. The theory of the four humours was inherited from the ancient Greeks, primarily the works of Hippocrates and Galen, and it dominated medical thinking for centuries. Medieval physicians and healers believed that when the humours were in balance, a person would experience good health and would exhibit beauty, as the body was functioning in harmony. However, if the humours became imbalanced due to illness, diet, or lifestyle, physical ailments would manifest, often leading to unattractiveness, discomfort, and even death. To maintain the balance of the humours, medieval people relied on a combination of diet, exercise, herbal remedies, and bloodletting. Foods were categorised as hot or cold, wet or dry, and each type of food was thought to have an effect on one's humours. A diet that was balanced in these qualities was thought to promote health and, by extension, beauty. For example, hot foods such as spices and meat were believed to stimulate the body's humours, while cold foods like fruits and vegetables were thought to calm the humours. The key was to maintain a delicate balance. Too much of any one type of food could result in an imbalance, leading to illness or skin conditions that marred one's appearance. Exercise, too, was seen as essential for maintaining good health and beauty. Physical activity was encouraged, especially for the nobility, who had access to leisure and could indulge in activities such as jousting, hunting, and dancing. For the peasants, however, exercise was simply a part of daily life. Through working in the fields, lifting heavy loads, or doing chores around the home, these activities kept them in relatively good shape, though they did not always lead to the kind of physical beauty that the elite aspired to. For the wealthy, maintaining beauty often involved more than just diet and exercise. It also required the use of cosmetic products, some of which were quite elaborate. Many noble women used a variety of beauty aids, such as powders, perfumes, and creams to maintain their appearance. However, these products were often made from ingredients that were not only ineffective but also harmful. For example, lead-based face powders were commonly used to achieve a pale, smooth complexion, but the toxicity of lead often resulted in poisoning and long-term health problems. Similarly, women would apply mercury-based cosmetics in an attempt to whiten their skin, unaware of the dangerous effects of mercury exposure. Despite the harmful nature of many beauty treatments, the desire for a flawless appearance was so strong that women were willing to endure these risks. Pale skin was particularly desirable in the medieval world, as it signified nobility and wealth. Those who worked outdoors, such as peasants, would have a sun-kissed complexion, which was considered less fashionable. In contrast, the wealthy elite, who could afford to stay indoors or under shade, would use cosmetics to further enhance their pale skin, creating the idealized look of beauty. This ideal of pale skin persisted throughout the Middle Ages, reinforced by both religious and cultural norms. But what about hygiene? In a time when bathing was infrequent and often seen as a potentially dangerous activity, maintaining cleanliness was more about avoiding disease than promoting beauty. Most medieval people took a bath only a few times a year, and the water available for bathing was often dirty. Public bathhouses were common in cities, but they were also places where disease could spread quickly. The idea of hygiene was rudimentary, and cleanliness was not associated with beauty in the same way that it is today. Medieval people did have some methods for cleaning their bodies and clothes, however. They would use herbal infusions and aromatic oils to clean themselves, as well as to mask the odour of sweat and dirt. The use of perfumes was widespread, and fragrant oils were considered a luxury, often worn by the wealthy to enhance their appearance and scent. For the common folk, the practice of washing was usually limited to hands and face, as access to fresh water was scarce. Even in the homes of the wealthy, bathing was not seen as a frequent necessity, and the cleanliness of one's body was often overlooked, unless there was a visible issue such as lice, sores, or other infections. In addition to perfumes and oils, medieval people also used various substances to treat skin ailments. Wounds were common, particularly during times of war or social unrest, and herbal remedies were often applied to prevent infection. For those who could afford it, a medical practitioner might apply ointments made from expensive ingredients like honey, rosewater, or certain minerals, hoping to cleanse and heal the body. However, many of these treatments were no more effective than basic cleanliness, and often the medieval approach to healing only served to exacerbate the underlying health problems. The connection between beauty and health was not just about maintaining a good appearance, it was also about surviving in a world that was rife with disease. In the Middle Ages, health was a matter of life and death. Contagions like the Black Plague could wipe out entire populations in a matter of weeks, and the causes of illness were often misunderstood. Without the medical knowledge we have today, medieval people relied on a combination of superstition and rudimentary science to try and prevent disease. The belief that cleanliness and the balance of the humours could protect against illness was widespread, and people did what they could to avoid the debilitating effects of disease, even if they had no real understanding of how it spread. But despite the poor understanding of hygiene and health, the pursuit of beauty continued to be central to medieval life. It was tied to both societal status and survival. Those who were healthy and beautiful were more likely to attract the attention of potential partners and secure a good marriage, while those who were ill or disfigured faced social ostracism and limited prospects. Beauty was not just a reflection of one's appearance, it was a symbol of moral virtue, social standing, and divine favour. As we consider the relationship between beauty and health in the medieval world, we must reflect on how much of this knowledge has carried over to the modern day. How has our understanding of beauty and hygiene evolved, and what can we learn from the medieval approach to the body? Can we ever truly escape the pressures of maintaining a certain appearance, or are these ideals as deeply ingrained in our society as they were in the Middle Ages? As we delve deeper into the relationship between health, hygiene, and beauty in the medieval period, we cannot ignore the dark undercurrent that ran through daily life. The prevalence of disease, poor sanitation, and the frequent inability of medieval people to maintain even basic hygiene. The struggle for beauty in this period was not just about appearance, it was deeply tied to survival, in a world where disease could strike with terrifying unpredictability. The medieval understanding of health was limited and often misguided, which meant that disease, both visible and invisible, was a constant companion to beauty and health. The connection between cleanliness and disease was still poorly understood, and many people relied on ineffective or even harmful remedies to try to stay beautiful and healthy. One of the most significant health challenges in medieval Europe was the constant threat of epidemics and contagious diseases. Diseases such as smallpox, leprosy, tuberculosis, and the infamous Black Death, the plague, were rampant during this period, and they left an indelible mark on the way people viewed both health and beauty. People understood that disease could affect the body's outward appearance, but they often misinterpreted its causes and remedies, leading to medical practices that were as likely to worsen conditions as they were to improve them. In medieval times, the idea of disease was often linked to supernatural forces. People believed that illness was a punishment from God, a divine retribution for sins, or the result of evil spirits or bad air. This religious view of disease meant that the physical appearance of a sick person was often seen as a sign of their moral or spiritual failings. When someone suffered from disfiguring conditions such as leprosy or smallpox, their outward appearance was considered a manifestation of their inner corruption. This led to social stigmatization, and in the case of leprosy, the forced isolation of sufferers from the rest of society. The fear of disease also led to the belief that cleanliness was a form of spiritual and physical protection. While hygiene practices were rudimentary, they were still a key part of medieval health. The common belief was that washing one's body and clothing could ward off illness, though the methods used were not always effective. Bathing was seen as a necessary activity in some regions, especially in cities, where public bathhouses were frequented by the upper classes. These bathhouses, however, were not always clean, and in many cases, they became hotbeds for the spread of disease. Bathing itself was seen as risky because it exposed the body to public scrutiny, and the potential dangers of communal bathing in warm, stagnant water were not well understood. The Church, which had a powerful influence on medieval society, took a cautious approach to hygiene and bathing. Church officials often warned that public baths could lead to sin due to the nudity involved, and many believed that the exposure of the body to public view was immoral. As a result, cleanliness was seen more as a necessity for avoiding disease than for enhancing beauty. For the lower classes, bathing was a rare and dangerous activity, and most people simply relied on hand-washing and the use of perfumes or fragrant herbs to mask body odours. In rural areas, People would wash in rivers, but access to clean water was limited, and the water was often contaminated by waste and disease. For the nobility, hygiene was somewhat better, but it still left much to be desired. Wealthy women would spend hours at their mirrors, applying cosmetics to their skin in an attempt to achieve the pale, flawless complexion that was so desired in the medieval world. They used face powders made from lead or chalk, which, though effective at whitening the skin, were extremely toxic. These cosmetics often led to poisoning over time, as the lead would seep into the skin and accumulate in the body. Mercury was another common ingredient in cosmetics, as it was believed to clear blemishes and brighten the skin. However, mercury was highly toxic, and prolonged exposure could lead to serious health problems, including madness and death. The desire to achieve an idealized beauty often came at a terrible cost to one's health, and many women paid the price for their pursuit of perfection. At the same time, the medical understanding of disease was rudimentary at best. The concept of germs and bacteria did not exist, and the idea that cleanliness could prevent disease was not widely accepted. Instead, people believed that disease was caused by an imbalance in the body's humours or the influence of external factors such as bad air or evil spirits. In many cases, people turned to herbal remedies and potions, many of which were ineffective or even harmful. Bloodletting was another common medical practice believed to restore balance to the body's humours. However, this often weakened the patient further, leading to complications and even death. The fear of disease and the constant threat of epidemics shaped medieval attitudes toward beauty and health. In times of plague or widespread illness, people were especially concerned with their appearance, as they feared that being marked by disease would lead to social ostracism. Those who contracted visible diseases like leprosy, or who suffered from facial disfigurement due to smallpox or other conditions, were often forced to hide their appearance or live in isolation. Leprosy, in particular, carried a powerful stigma, and people who were diagnosed with it were frequently cast out from society, living in leper colonies away from the general population. Their disfigured bodies became a visible marker of their disease, and they were often left to die in isolation. In the case of the Black Death, which struck Europe in the mid-14th century, the relationship between beauty and disease became even more pronounced. The plague, which wiped out an estimated one-third of Europe's population, was characterized by its disfiguring effects. Victims would often develop painful swollen buboes, which made them appear grotesque and unnatural. These signs of illness were impossible to hide, and those affected were often left to die alone. For the survivors, the fear of disease became even more urgent, as people tried to protect themselves from the pestilence that seemed to strike at random. The beauty standards of the time, which emphasized clear skin and an unblemished body, were thrown into sharp contrast by the ravages of disease. For many, the pursuit of beauty in a world so fraught with illness seemed hopelessly futile. Yet, despite the rampant disease and death that plagued medieval society, the desire for beauty remained strong. The elite, particularly the royalty and nobility, continued to adhere to the beauty standards of the time, using cosmetics and other means to enhance their appearance. At the same time, however, they were acutely aware of the fragility of life, and many sought to preserve their beauty as a means of asserting their power and social position in an uncertain world. As we look back on the medieval period, it's clear that the pursuit of beauty was not just about appearance, it was about survival. Beauty, hygiene, and health were all interwoven in a complex web of social, religious, and medical beliefs. The desire for beauty was often a means of coping with the harsh realities of medieval life, where disease and death were constant threats. But the methods used to attain beauty were often harmful, and the costs of pursuing perfection were high. The medieval obsession with beauty, health, and hygiene shaped not only how people lived, but also how they died, as many sought to maintain their appearance even in the face of disease and decay. As we reflect on the legacy of these medieval beauty standards, we are left to ponder how much our modern understanding of beauty, health, and hygiene has been shaped by the past. While we have made significant strides in medicine and sanitation, the pursuit of beauty still carries many of the same pressures that existed in the Middle Ages. The desire for perfection remains, and the costs of achieving it, whether through diet, exercise, or cosmetics, can still be high. But as we move forward, it is important to remember the lessons of the past. Beauty, in the end, is fleeting, and true health lies not in perfection, but in balance and self-acceptance. As we conclude our examination of beauty, hygiene, and health in the medieval world, It is clear that the ideals of the time left a lasting imprint on our modern conceptions of beauty and wellness. Despite the harsh realities of medieval life, the constant threat of disease, the limited understanding of health, and the societal pressures to conform to rigid beauty standards, the pursuit of beauty in the Middle Ages was undeniably powerful. It shaped not only how people lived, but how they viewed themselves and their place in society. And while many of the medieval beauty standards have faded into history, their influence still resonates in our world today. The medieval pursuit of beauty was not just about physical appearance. It was tied to identity, survival, and social power. In a time when disease and death were pervasive, beauty offered a way to assert one's place in the world, to display virtue and moral purity, and to escape the harsh judgment of society. Beauty was more than skin deep. It was an outward expression of inward health, spiritual balance, and social worth. For the wealthy, maintaining beauty meant securing social and political advantage, while for the poor, beauty became a way to attract mates and increase the chances of survival in a brutal, unpredictable world. Today, the pursuit of beauty remains as prevalent as ever, though it manifests in different forms. The societal pressures to conform to beauty ideals continue to shape our self-perceptions and interactions with others. The modern beauty industry, a multi-billion-dollar global enterprise, is built on the same foundations that were established in medieval Europe. The belief that beauty holds power, that a flawless appearance is desirable, and that one's worth can be determined by how closely they align with certain physical ideals. In many ways, we are still chasing the same ideals of clear skin, youthful appearance, and slim bodies that dominated the medieval world. However, as we consider these parallels, it is important to recognize how far we have come in terms of understanding health and beauty. In the medieval era, beauty was inextricably linked to health, and achieving beauty often meant risking one's health through dangerous cosmetics, harmful diets, or ineffective treatments. The obsession with pale skin, for instance, led to the widespread use of toxic substances like lead and mercury. While such extreme practices are less common today, modern beauty standards still exert significant pressure, especially through the pervasive influence of media and social networks. Cosmetic surgeries, skincare treatments, and dietary supplements are marketed as ways to attain perfection, often leading individuals to invest heavily in maintaining a youthful appearance, sometimes at the expense of their well-being. In terms of hygiene, the medieval world had a rudimentary understanding of cleanliness, which, while essential for preventing disease, was often insufficient in addressing the underlying causes of illness. Public bathhouses, although common, were breeding grounds for disease, and the lack of regular bathing in private homes created fertile ground for infections. People in the Middle Ages could not have anticipated the modern understanding of germs and bacteria, and yet the idea of cleanliness as a means to avoid disease still resonates today. In the modern world, hygiene is now regarded as fundamental not only to physical health, but also to social acceptance. The development of sanitation systems, clean drinking water, and advanced medical knowledge has significantly reduced the prevalence of disease, yet the link between beauty and hygiene remains strong. The rise of skincare routines, from the simplest soaps to the most advanced anti-aging products, is a reflection of our continuing desire to achieve flawless, healthy skin. In many ways, the medieval focus on balancing the humours and maintaining bodily harmony through diet and exercise echoes modern trends in holistic health and wellness. Today, there is an increasing emphasis on achieving balance in life through natural remedies, organic foods, and mindful practices such as yoga and meditation. The modern wellness movement encourages people to take a more holistic approach to health, emphasizing not just physical beauty but mental and emotional well-being as well. This reflects the medieval belief that health was not only a matter of the body but of the spirit. However, despite these advances, the modern pursuit of beauty still carries the same dangers that plagued the medieval period. The pressure to conform to narrow, often unattainable standards of beauty continues to lead to issues such as body dysmorphia, low self-esteem, and eating disorders. Social media, with its constant stream of filtered images and curated perfection, exacerbates these pressures. The rise of influencers, celebrities, and beauty bloggers who promote a curated version of perfection has created a toxic environment where beauty is not only a measure of physical attractiveness, but a status symbol, a way of gaining validation and approval from others. In this context, the modern pursuit of beauty is not entirely dissimilar to that of medieval times. The desire to fit a certain mold, to achieve a flawless appearance, and to be seen as worthy by society remains a constant theme. Yet, today's beauty standards are not just about health, but about an idealized version of what is considered perfect. The focus on youth, smooth skin and slimness often overshadows the realities of aging, diversity, and individuality. The beauty industry, for all its advancements, still places a heavy emphasis on conformity, making it difficult for many to feel comfortable in their own skin. The lessons we can learn from the medieval era are vital for understanding the ongoing evolution of beauty standards and how they affect our modern lives. One of the most important lessons is the recognition that beauty is not a one-size-fits-all ideal. Medieval beauty standards were deeply influenced by class, gender, and religious beliefs, and these same factors continue to shape how beauty is perceived today. Just as beauty in the medieval world was often a tool for social and political gain, it still plays a significant role in how we navigate our social worlds. However, there is also a growing movement toward embracing diversity and redefining beauty. The body positivity movement, the celebration of diverse skin tones, and the increasing acceptance of different body types reflect a shift away from the rigid standards of the past. As we continue to question the legacy of medieval beauty standards, it is important to acknowledge the progress we have made, while also recognizing the work that still needs to be done. True beauty, as the medieval world perhaps unwittingly hinted at, lies in balance. It is not about achieving perfection, but about accepting and nurturing the body in all its forms. This balance is not just about external appearance, but also about inner health, mental, emotional, and spiritual. The modern world has the opportunity to move away from the damaging obsession with perfection and embrace a more inclusive, holistic understanding of beauty. In the end, the enduring legacy of medieval beauty standards teaches us that beauty is a complex and ever-evolving concept. It is deeply intertwined with our understanding of health, social status, and identity. While we have made great strides in our medical and scientific knowledge, the pressures of beauty are as real today as they were in the Middle Ages. The challenge moving forward will be to break free from these unrealistic ideals and redefine beauty as something that celebrates diversity, embraces individuality, and prioritizes well-being over appearance. The pursuit of beauty in the medieval world was fraught with danger, and the costs of maintaining perfection were high. But perhaps the greatest lesson we can learn from this history is that beauty, like health, is not something to be achieved through extremes. It is something to be nurtured, celebrated, and respected in all its forms. In the medieval world, beauty was not merely a superficial attribute, it was a tool of power. For those at the top of the social hierarchy, beauty was an important marker of status and virtue, a quality that could open doors to marriage alliances, political influence, and wealth. Yet for many, the pursuit of beauty came at a high price, both physically and socially. The lengths to which medieval men and women went to attain or maintain beauty were often extreme, even dangerous, and the long-term effects of these beauty treatments were far-reaching, with consequences that continue to echo in the modern world. The concept of beauty in medieval society was far from simplistic. It was intimately tied to moral virtue and social standing. A beautiful woman in the medieval world was seen not only as physically appealing, but also as an embodiment of purity, grace, and virtue. Women who adhered to the ideals of beauty were often viewed as more virtuous and deserving of high social status. On the other hand, women who failed to meet these beauty standards, or worse, who attempted to embellish their beauty through artificial means, were often seen as vain or at worst morally corrupt. Beauty, in essence, was not only a reflection of physical appearance, but also a direct representation of one's soul and character. In this context, the pursuit of beauty became not just an aesthetic choice, but a moral obligation for many, particularly the nobility. The pressure to appear flawless led people to use dangerous beauty treatments that often had harmful, if not lethal, consequences. One of the most well-known medieval beauty practices involved the use of lead-based face powders. These powders were applied to the face in order to create a pale, porcelain-like complexion, an ideal that symbolized wealth, class, and virtue. A pale face was considered the hallmark of nobility, as it signified that one did not work outdoors, unlike the lower classes whose sun-kissed skin was deemed less desirable. However, lead was highly toxic, and prolonged use of lead-based cosmetics resulted in serious health problems. Lead poisoning caused a variety of symptoms, including fatigue, gastrointestinal issues, and even brain damage. Over time, the lead would accumulate in the body, slowly poisoning the individual, often with fatal consequences. Despite the risks, many women in medieval Europe, particularly in the courts of Italy and France, continued to use these products to achieve the pale skin that was seen as the ultimate beauty ideal. The pursuit of beauty, in this case, led to a slow and agonizing deterioration of health, yet the cultural pressure to conform to these ideals was so strong that it was often ignored or overlooked. In addition to lead-based cosmetics, another common practice among medieval women was the use of mercury, a substance thought to have magical properties that could cleanse the skin and remove blemishes. Mercury was also used in face creams and ointments, as it was believed to purify the skin, lighten the complexion, and make it appear smoother. However, mercury is a powerful neurotoxin, and long-term exposure can cause a variety of health issues, including kidney damage, memory loss, and tremors. Despite the known risks, mercury-based treatments were highly prized, and many women continued to use them in the hope of achieving the perfect, smooth complexion. The use of these toxic substances was not limited to the nobility. In fact, it was often the wealthier women who had the means to access these beauty treatments. But even those with more limited resources sought out ways to enhance their appearance. For example, various herbal concoctions and beauty recipes were commonly used to whiten teeth, smooth wrinkles, and enhance facial features. Many of these products were made from a combination of natural ingredients like honey, vinegar, and rosewater, but some were mixed with potentially harmful substances like arsenic or caustic soda. These treatments could have damaging effects on the skin, hair, and overall health, yet the desire to conform to the prevailing beauty ideals led many to use them without fully understanding the dangers. For the men of the medieval period, beauty was not as heavily emphasized, but there were still expectations, especially among the aristocracy. Knights, nobles, and royalty were expected to maintain an appearance that reflected their status and power. This often meant that they, too, turned to beauty treatments, albeit in different ways. Hair was one of the most significant aspects of a man's appearance in the medieval world, particularly for the nobility. Long, well-groomed hair was seen as a symbol of virility, strength, and honour. Knights and lords often took great care in styling their hair, sometimes using oils and perfumes to keep it healthy and smelling pleasant. But hair treatments, like those for the face, came with their own set of risks. The use of certain oils and herbs, especially those that were not properly tested, could lead to scalp infections, hair loss, or allergic reactions. Beyond the aesthetic treatments for hair and skin, the medieval period also saw the rise of bodily adornment as a form of beauty. The practice of wearing jewellery, particularly for women, was widespread, and the types of jewellery worn were often indicative of social status. Gold and silver were highly valued, and precious gemstones were seen as symbols of wealth and beauty. Yet jewellery was not without its own dangers. The use of heavy, restrictive clothing such as tightly laced corsets was common during the period, especially for women. These garments were intended to create the ideal hourglass figure: small waist, large hips, and a prominent bust. However, corsets often caused discomfort, restricted breathing, and even internal injuries. Women who wore these garments for extended periods suffered from a range of health issues, including rib damage, indigestion, and weakened muscles. The pursuit of beauty in the medieval world was so ingrained in society that it permeated every aspect of daily life. It was not just about personal vanity, it was about survival, status, and societal acceptance. Those who failed to meet the beauty standards of the time were often marginalized, dismissed, or stigmatized. The beautiful were rewarded with power, influence, and respect, while those deemed unattractive or lacking in physical charm faced harsh judgments. This dichotomy created a world where beauty was both a privilege and a burden, and the desire to attain it led many to extreme lengths. Yet the aftermath of these beauty practices was often chilling. The long-term effects of using toxic substances, wearing restrictive clothing, and adhering to dangerous beauty regimens were not immediately visible, but they were undeniable. Many women, particularly those who used lead and mercury-based cosmetics, suffered from lifelong health issues as a result of their beauty treatments. And while these practices may have brought temporary improvements to one's appearance, they often came at the expense of long-term physical and mental health. As we reflect on the medieval pursuit of beauty, we are reminded of how societal pressures to conform to beauty standards continue to shape our perceptions today. In modern times, while the materials and methods have changed, the desire to attain beauty remains a powerful force. The modern beauty industry, much like the medieval beauty standards, continues to promote certain ideals of physical perfection, ideals that are often unattainable and potentially harmful. The obsession with clear skin, youthful appearances, and thinness is still very much a part of contemporary culture, and the pressures to meet these standards can have a lasting impact on mental and physical health. In many ways, the lessons from medieval beauty standards are still relevant. The pursuit of beauty in its most extreme forms continues to pose risks to health and well-being, but as society becomes more aware of these dangers, there is a growing movement to challenge these beauty ideals and embrace a more inclusive and realistic view of beauty. Just as medieval beauty standards were deeply tied to issues of class, gender, and power, modern beauty standards are also shaped by the societal forces that often prioritize appearance over health. By learning from the past, we can begin to shift our focus away from perfection and towards a more holistic and inclusive definition of beauty, one that values health, individuality, and authenticity over conformity. As we explore the long-lasting effects of medieval beauty standards and the dangerous practices that came with them, it's essential to understand the deep-seated legacy that these ideals have left on modern conceptions of beauty. The pursuit of perfection, which once led people to toxic, harmful beauty treatments, has evolved in the modern world into a multi-billion-dollar industry, perpetuated by both traditional media and, more recently, social media. Though the tools and methods have changed, the underlying pressures to conform to a particular standard of beauty remain strikingly similar to those in the Middle Ages. In medieval society, the ideal of beauty was not just about outward appearance, but also about virtue, morality, and social standing. The concept of beauty was tied to a person's character, and those who adhered to beauty standards were often seen as virtuous, pure, and deserving of high social status. For women, this meant conforming to ideals of pale skin, small waists, and delicate features, an image of innocence and wealth. Women's beauty was, therefore, both a personal attribute and a symbol of their social class and moral standing. Much like today, physical appearance played a crucial role in one's ability to move through society, gain respect, and attract potential suitors. The pressure to meet these standards led to extreme and, in some cases, dangerous beauty practices. Women used lead-based cosmetics to achieve the ideal pale complexion, a symbol of high social status, while mercury was used to remove blemishes and perfect the skin. Both of these substances were toxic, leading to long-term health issues. Despite the known dangers, these products were widely used, revealing a powerful societal obsession with achieving an unattainable ideal of beauty. Even as we look at these practices through a modern lens, it's important to understand how deeply embedded the desire for perfection was in medieval culture, and how it shaped not just personal identity but societal roles as well. Fast forward to the present day, and we see that many of the same ideals that dominated the medieval period continue to influence our modern understanding of beauty. The desire for flawless, smooth skin, the emphasis on a slim figure, and the pursuit of youthfulness are all deeply ingrained in today's beauty standards. Modern technology, such as advanced skincare products, cosmetic surgery, and social media filters, has amplified these pressures to unprecedented levels. However, as we consider the dangers of the medieval beauty practices, we must also reflect on the modern versions of these ideals, how they are perpetuated, and what impact they have on individuals today. The rise of the beauty industry in the 19th and 20th centuries marked a significant shift in how beauty was perceived and pursued. Unlike in medieval times, when beauty practices were often limited to the elite, the modern beauty industry made these standards accessible to the masses. With the proliferation of beauty products, from skincare to makeup, came the idea that anyone could achieve the perfect look. The advent of advertising played a pivotal role in shaping this new beauty culture. Images of models with flawless skin, slim bodies, and symmetrical features became the gold standard, perpetuating a narrow definition of beauty that excluded diversity and reinforced ideals that were virtually impossible for most people to achieve. The invention of the beauty industry's marketing strategies helped create the illusion that anyone could transform themselves into these idealized images. The rise of advertising in magazines, television, and more recently social media led to the proliferation of beauty gurus and influencers who used filters, Photoshop, and extensive beauty routines to present an unattainable level of perfection. Today, beauty standards are driven largely by these influencers and the curated images they present online. These influencers often promote products and services that promise to help individuals achieve perfection, whether it's through weight loss pills, cosmetic surgeries, or skincare regimens that target every perceived flaw. Yet, despite the abundance of beauty products and services, the pressure to meet these ideals has led to an increase in mental health struggles, particularly among women and young people. Body dysmorphia, low self-esteem, and eating disorders have become more prevalent as the gap between the idealized images of beauty and reality has widened. Modern beauty standards, much like the medieval standards, place an overwhelming emphasis on appearance, leading to a society where physical beauty is often considered synonymous with worth and success. In both the medieval and modern worlds, beauty remains a tool of social power, a way to gain acceptance, validation, and respect. But the similarities between medieval and modern beauty standards are not limited to the physical. In both eras, beauty was seen as a reflection of a person's inner character. In the Middle Ages, a woman's physical beauty was associated with her moral purity and social virtue. The same pressure persists today, albeit in a more subtle form. Modern beauty culture often reinforces the idea that beauty is a measure of a person's worth, tying one's appearance to their value in the eyes of others. In the workplace, for instance, studies have shown that individuals who conform to certain beauty standards are more likely to be hired, promoted, and respected, regardless of their qualifications or abilities. This demonstrates how deeply ingrained the connection between beauty and social value continues to be. While the toxic beauty ideals of the medieval period were often linked to a rigid class structure, the modern beauty standards are shaped by a different kind of power: economic power. The beauty industry today is a global business, with consumers spending billions of dollars each year on products designed to enhance their appearance. Unlike the medieval aristocracy, who could afford expensive beauty treatments, modern consumers are bombarded with messages that suggest beauty is accessible to all, provided one is willing to invest in the right products. This democratization of beauty products has made the pursuit of an idealized appearance a universal goal, but it has also made the pressure to conform even more widespread. The explosion of social media in the 21st century has further amplified the pressure to conform to these beauty ideals. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat have created a new generation of influencers who have immense power over beauty trends. These influencers often use filters and editing tools to achieve perfection, setting a new standard for what is considered beautiful. What's more troubling is that these images are often presented as authentic, leading to a distorted perception of beauty for millions of people. The constant comparison to these curated images can cause feelings of inadequacy, depression, and anxiety, issues that have been exacerbated by the pervasive nature of social media. This modern obsession with beauty is a direct continuation of the medieval fixation on physical appearance. In both periods, people sought to control and shape their bodies in ways that would align them with societal ideals. While the methods may have changed, from the use of lead-based face powders in the Middle Ages to modern cosmetic procedures and Instagram filters, the underlying desire for perfection remains the same. Just as medieval women used dangerous substances in the pursuit of beauty, modern individuals often turn to surgeries, diet trends, and beauty treatments in an attempt to achieve an ideal that is, for most, unattainable. The influence of medieval beauty standards on modern ideals is clear in the persistent focus on certain physical traits: clear skin, a symmetrical face, and a slim body. In both eras, these traits are seen as indicators of social worth, moral purity, and success. The quest for beauty has led people to risk their health in the pursuit of an unattainable standard, a pursuit that often ends in physical and emotional damage. However, the modern world does have one advantage over the medieval period: access to knowledge. We are more aware today of the psychological and physical consequences of extreme beauty practices, and there is a growing movement toward body positivity and acceptance. But despite this progress, the pressure to conform to beauty standards is still pervasive, and the legacy of medieval beauty ideals continues to shape how we perceive ourselves and others. In the end, the medieval obsession with beauty and the dangers associated with it are not merely a historical curiosity. They are part of a broader, ongoing conversation about how society defines beauty and the lengths people will go to in order to achieve it. While we have made strides in challenging these standards, the influence of the past remains powerful. As we continue to navigate our own beauty culture, it is important to reflect on how these ideals have evolved and what lessons we can learn from history. Ultimately, the challenge is not just to redefine beauty, but to redefine our worth beyond appearance, and to embrace the diversity of human bodies and experiences. As we conclude our deep dive into the history and impact of medieval beauty standards, it's time to reflect on the question that has lingered throughout this exploration. Can we, as a society, finally break free from the cycle of unattainable beauty ideals that have dominated culture for centuries? While it's clear that the pursuit of physical perfection has been a driving force throughout history, it is equally clear that this obsession with beauty has come at great cost, especially to our mental, emotional, and physical well-being. The medieval obsession with pale skin, slim figures, and delicate features was not simply a matter of aesthetic preference. It was a social construct tied to power, class, and moral purity. Today, these same ideals still shape our world, but now they come with a different kind of pressure. The pressure to meet the standards set by the beauty industry, influencers, and social media. The key difference between medieval and modern beauty standards lies in how these ideals are perpetuated. In the Middle Ages, beauty was heavily associated with wealth and status. Nobility and royalty could afford to use toxic substances like lead and mercury to achieve their desired appearance, while the lower classes were often left to fend for themselves with rudimentary methods. The pursuit of beauty was, therefore, a symbol of social hierarchy, and those who failed to meet the standards were often marginalized. Fast forward to the 21st century, and while beauty ideals have evolved, the societal pressure to conform has intensified, primarily through the media and digital platforms. With the rise of social media, beauty standards have become more global, and the pressure to adhere to them is now more accessible to people across all socio-economic backgrounds. The rise of platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat has reshaped the way we view beauty. These platforms allow users to present curated, polished versions of themselves, often enhanced through filters and editing tools. The images shared online are frequently far removed from reality, yet they set the standard for what is considered beautiful. In a sense, social media has magnified the medieval obsession with outward perfection, making it not just about social status, but about constant validation and attention. The fear of not fitting into these beauty ideals has led to a growing sense of inadequacy, especially among young people who are more susceptible to external pressures and often struggle with body image issues. But while the pressure to conform to these standards may be more pervasive than ever, there are signs of change on the horizon. In recent years, movements such as body positivity, fat acceptance, and the celebration of diversity in beauty have gained momentum. These movements challenge the narrow, often harmful ideals of beauty that have dominated for centuries and encourage individuals to embrace their bodies as they are, flaws and all. The body positivity movement, in particular, has gained significant traction, with advocates promoting self-love and the rejection of unrealistic beauty standards. Social media platforms, which were once responsible for perpetuating harmful beauty ideals, have become a space for people to celebrate different body types, skin tones, and physical features. This shift has been facilitated by influencers and activists who challenge the traditional norms of beauty. Celebrities like Lizzo, who openly promotes body positivity and self-love, have become icons of a new, more inclusive definition of beauty. Fashion brands and beauty companies have also started to embrace diversity, casting models of various shapes, sizes, and ethnicities in their campaigns. While this is still a relatively recent change in the beauty industry, it represents a significant departure from the homogeneous standards that once defined what was considered attractive. These movements show promise for a future where beauty is not defined by rigid, narrow ideals, but by the acceptance of all forms of beauty. However, breaking the cycle of unattainable beauty standards is not without its challenges. While the body positivity movement has made significant strides, there are still significant forces at play that perpetuate harmful beauty ideals. The beauty and fashion industries, which profit from the sale of products that promise to make consumers look younger, thinner, and perfect, continue to push an image of beauty that is not attainable for the majority of people. Despite the growing demand for inclusivity, these industries often continue to promote a one-size-fits-all image of beauty. For example, many beauty advertisements still focus on skin that is smooth, flawless, and free of imperfections, setting an unrealistic expectation for consumers who may struggle with acne, scars, or other skin conditions. The rise of anti-aging products, which promise to turn back the clock and restore youthfulness, continues to perpetuate the idea that aging is something to be feared and fought against, reinforcing the belief that beauty is tied to youth. Furthermore, the influence of social media continues to pose a significant challenge to the body positivity movement. While social media has allowed for greater representation of diverse beauty, it has also created a culture of comparison. Algorithms on platforms like Instagram and TikTok are designed to promote content that generates the most engagement, often favouring images of people who fit conventional beauty standards. As a result, users are more likely to encounter images of flawless skin, slim bodies, and symmetrical faces, which reinforces the notion that beauty is tied to these idealized features. Even the body positivity movement, while advocating for acceptance of all bodies, can sometimes be co-opted by the very industries it seeks to challenge, with brands using inclusive imagery as a marketing tool rather than as a genuine commitment to diversity. Breaking the cycle of unattainable beauty standards, therefore, requires more than just a shift in public perception. It requires systemic change. We must challenge not only the industries that profit from the perpetuation of these standards, but also the cultural beliefs and societal norms that underpin them. Education and media literacy play a crucial role in helping individuals, especially young people, navigate the often unrealistic portrayals of beauty they encounter online. By fostering critical thinking about the images we see on social media, we can begin to deconstruct the harmful ideals of beauty that have been ingrained in our culture for centuries. At the same time, we must also continue to celebrate and embrace diversity in all its forms. Beauty is not a one-size-fits-all concept, and it should not be confined to a narrow set of physical traits. The more we normalize a broader definition of beauty, one that includes all body types, skin tones, ages and abilities, the more we can challenge the damaging notion that there is a perfect way to look. True beauty lies not in perfection, but in authenticity and self-acceptance. The medieval period, with its obsession with pale skin and delicate features, set the stage for the modern beauty ideals we continue to grapple with today. While we may no longer use toxic substances like lead and mercury to achieve these standards, the desire for perfection continues to drive harmful beauty practices and unrealistic expectations. The challenge moving forward is to break free from the cycle of perfectionism, to redefine beauty on our own terms, and to create a world where people are valued for who they are, not just how they look. In conclusion, the legacy of medieval beauty standards serves as both a warning and an opportunity. While the pursuit of beauty has always been a part of the human experience, it is crucial that we shift our focus from the external to the internal, valuing kindness, authenticity, and individuality over physical appearance. As we move toward a more inclusive and diverse future, we must remember that beauty is not about conforming to a standard, but about embracing the uniqueness of every individual. It is only by rejecting the rigid, harmful standards of the past that we can begin to build a healthier, more accepting world for future generations. The medieval period was a time of great contradiction when it came to health and medicine. On one hand, the advancements made in understanding anatomy, herbal remedies, and surgery were the foundations of modern medical practices. On the other, medieval medicine was also steeped in mysticism, superstition, and a limited understanding of the human body. The blending of science and folklore created a unique, often bewildering approach to healing. The medieval doctor was both a scholar and a mystic, a healer with one foot in the rational world and the other in the spiritual one. During the medieval period, healthcare was far from standardized. Medical knowledge varied greatly depending on region, class, and religious affiliation. For the common people, medical practices were often tied to folk traditions, where remedies passed down through generations of families held more sway than the advice of trained physicians. Herbs, potions, and various concoctions were routinely used to treat everything from colds to the plague. Yet, despite the extensive use of these natural remedies, medicine was also deeply influenced by the religious and superstitious beliefs, which often overshadowed any practical or scientific methods. Perhaps the most iconic figure in medieval medicine was the physician, or medicus. Physicians were often well-educated men, typically trained in the great universities of Europe, such as those in Bologna or Paris. They studied classical texts from ancient Greece and Rome, particularly the works of Hippocrates and Galen. These ancient texts were regarded as the ultimate authorities on medical knowledge, and medieval doctors often relied on their teachings to diagnose and treat patients. However, medical knowledge was still far from complete, and many treatments were based on guesswork or theories that were either incomplete or simply wrong. For instance, the concept of the four humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, was still a prevalent belief, influencing the way doctors treated everything from fevers to mental illness. The idea was that disease occurred when one of these humours became unbalanced, and treatments aimed at restoring balance were employed, often through bloodletting, purging, or the administration of herbal concoctions. The medieval approach to healthcare was often a mix of rational science and superstition. Physicians, despite their education, still relied on spiritual and mystical elements to explain illness. Diseases were frequently seen as divine punishments for sin or the work of malevolent spirits. For example, the Black Death, which ravaged Europe in the 14th century, was widely believed to be a punishment sent by God, a view that shaped how people responded to the epidemic. While some medical practitioners advocated for quarantines, clean water, and hygiene to prevent the spread of disease, many others believed that prayer, penance, and divine intervention were the most effective remedies. At the same time, there were those who embraced more pragmatic approaches to healing. Many medieval doctors relied on herbal medicine, which was passed down through ancient and local traditions. Herbs like lavender, sage, and garlic were used to treat everything from infections to digestive issues. While the understanding of these plants' medicinal properties was limited, their continued use throughout the centuries is a testament to the effectiveness of many of these natural remedies. In fact, modern herbal medicine still draws on much of the knowledge that was passed down from medieval healers. In addition to herbal remedies, medieval doctors also employed a variety of surgical techniques, some of which were surprisingly advanced for the time. Trepanation, the practice of drilling holes into the skull to treat head injuries or release evil spirits, was one of the more bizarre and unsettling practices of the time. While we now understand that trepanation can sometimes be a life-saving procedure in cases of severe head trauma, in the medieval period it was more likely to be used as a spiritual practice or as a last-ditch effort to cure illnesses like epilepsy. Surgical procedures were often performed by barber surgeons, trained men who were skilled in both cutting hair and performing minor surgeries. These barber surgeons were common figures in medieval communities, offering services that ranged from pulling teeth to setting broken bones. While their medical knowledge was often rudimentary, their expertise in basic surgical procedures meant that many people relied on them for treatments. Some barber surgeons went on to develop impressive skills in amputations and even eye surgery, although the lack of anesthesia made these procedures incredibly painful and dangerous. Despite the advancements in certain areas, medieval medicine was still deeply hampered by the limitations of the time. The concept of germ theory was not yet developed, and much of the medieval understanding of disease was rooted in ancient beliefs. For example, when the plague swept through Europe, people believed that the disease was spread by miasma, a noxious form of bad air. It wasn't until centuries later that scientists like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch would prove that bacteria, not bad air, were the primary culprits behind many infectious diseases. The absence of antibiotics and effective vaccines meant that many illnesses that are now treatable were often fatal in medieval times. One of the most tragic aspects of medieval medicine was its reliance on humoral theory for diagnosing and treating diseases. For centuries, the four humours theory dominated medical thinking. According to this belief, a person's health was determined by the balance of four bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If any of these humours became unbalanced, illness would result. To restore balance, medieval doctors would often prescribe treatments like bloodletting, purging, or the use of potions made from herbs or animal parts. Bloodletting in particular became a common practice for treating a wide range of ailments, from fevers to mental disorders. However, this practice was based on little more than superstition and often did more harm than good. Many patients who underwent bloodletting for minor ailments ended up dying from blood loss or the subsequent infections caused by unsanitary tools. While humoral theory was deeply embedded in medieval medical practice, it was also responsible for some surprising insights into the human body. One of the more remarkable medical advancements of the medieval period was the development of early anatomical knowledge. Despite the lack of modern technology, some medieval physicians, particularly in the Islamic world, made significant strides in understanding human anatomy through dissection. One of the most famous figures in this regard was Ibn al-Nafis, a 13th century Arab physician who discovered the pulmonary circulation of the blood, a concept that was later confirmed by Western scientists in the 17th century. His work was largely ignored by the medieval European physicians who were still clinging to Galen's theories. In addition to the medical practices of physicians, medieval society also relied heavily on religious figures for healing. Monasteries and convents often served as centres of healing, where monks and nuns would tend to the sick. These religious healers used both herbal remedies and spiritual practices such as prayer and fasting to treat illnesses. The medieval church played a significant role in shaping medical practices, and many hospitals were run by religious orders. For the common people, religious healing was often the most accessible option, as monasteries were spread throughout Europe, providing a sanctuary for those in need of care. The belief that illness could be cured through divine intervention was widespread, and many people turned to religious relics, prayers, and pilgrimages as a way of seeking healing. As we reflect on medieval medicine, it is fascinating to see how much of it was based on belief and faith, as much as on science. While some of the medical practices were grounded in superstition, others laid the groundwork for modern healthcare. Despite the many shortcomings of medieval medicine, the period was not entirely devoid of progress. The advancements in herbal medicine, surgical techniques and anatomical knowledge have had a lasting impact shaping the medical practices of later centuries. Yet the belief in mystical and divine healing would remain a powerful force for many centuries, and its echoes are still felt in some aspects of modern medicine. The lasting legacy of medieval medicine is a reminder that medical knowledge is constantly evolving. What was once considered advanced or effective may later be proven harmful or incomplete. Yet despite the limitations of medieval healthcare, many of the practices, ideas and discoveries made during this time set the stage for future medical breakthroughs. It is perhaps the unique combination of science and belief, reason and superstition that makes medieval medicine so fascinating. The next chapter of this story will delve deeper into how these practices evolved in the face of devastating pandemics and the growing influence of religious healing. In the 14th century, the world was struck by one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, the Black Death. This devastating plague, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, swept across Europe and Asia, leaving an indelible mark on medieval society and its medical practices. At the time, medical knowledge was still primitive, and the idea that a single microscopic organism could cause widespread death was inconceivable. The Black Death changed not only the way people viewed disease, but also the way they understood the relationship between human beings, nature, and the divine. During the first wave of the Black Death in 1347, Europe was woefully unprepared for the scale of the devastation. No one knew how the disease spread, and the medical community was utterly helpless in its efforts to prevent or treat it. Theories about the cause of the plague ranged from supernatural explanations to natural ones. Many believed the disease was a divine punishment for humanity's sins. The Church, which held significant influence over medieval life, offered prayers, religious processions and penance as remedies, but these measures were, of course, ineffective. People flocked to monasteries and churches seeking divine intervention, but there was little comfort to be found as the plague ravaged entire communities. At the same time, some doctors and scholars began to reconsider their approach to disease. As the death toll mounted, a few physicians started to explore the idea that illness might be spread by contagion. While this idea was still controversial and not widely accepted, it laid the groundwork for future breakthroughs in understanding infectious diseases. Some of the more progressive doctors, like the Italian physician Giovanni de Vico, argued that the plague was transmitted through human contact and that separating the sick from the healthy might reduce its spread. However, this theory was not universally embraced. The prevailing belief was still that the disease was caused by bad air or miasma, and many medical treatments continue to focus on purging the body of humours or attempting to ward off the evil forces responsible for the illness. The most visible response to the Black Death was the widespread use of quarantines, which were among the earliest attempts at controlling an epidemic. The city of Venice, one of the first to implement quarantine measures, required ships arriving from infected areas to remain isolated for 40 days before they could dock. This practice, known as quarantino, was born out of the growing realization that isolation might help prevent the spread of disease. While quarantine measures were based more on observation and trial and error than scientific evidence, they represented a significant shift in medical thinking. For the first time, people began to acknowledge the possibility of contagion, even though they didn't fully understand how or why it worked. In addition to quarantine, medieval physicians continued to rely on their traditional methods of treatment, such as bloodletting and the use of herbal remedies. Bloodletting, a practice that had been used for centuries, was still widely recommended by physicians as a way to balance the humours and alleviate symptoms of various illnesses. In the case of the plague, however, bloodletting often proved to be disastrous, as it weakened already fragile patients. Herbal remedies too were in high demand during the plague years. Some of the most common herbs used to ward off infection included rosemary, thyme and garlic, all of which were believed to have antimicrobial properties, though their efficacy in combating the plague was minimal at best. The failure of traditional medical treatments during the Black Death led to an increasing reliance on alternative methods. In some parts of Europe, people turned to witchcraft, magic and superstitions in their desperate attempts to avoid infection. Amulets, charms and religious relics were believed to offer protection from the plague, and some individuals even resorted to flagellation, self-inflicted whipping, hoping to atone for their sins and win divine favour. This period saw the rise of the flagellants, religious groups who believed that public displays of penance and suffering could cleanse their communities of the plague. While this practice had no basis in medicine, it reflected the deep psychological and spiritual toll that the plague took on European society. In the wake of the Black Death, the medieval medical community began to change in profound ways. While superstition and religious healing continued to play a role in the treatment of disease, there was a gradual shift towards more empirical methods. Physicians who survived the pandemic had witnessed firsthand the ineffectiveness of traditional remedies and began to rethink their approach to medicine. The experience of the plague highlighted the need for more systematic study and observation of disease, which led to an increased emphasis on hygiene and public health measures in the centuries to follow. During the Renaissance, which followed the medieval period, the foundations for modern medicine were laid. The study of anatomy, which had been largely neglected during the medieval era, was revived, and the works of ancient scholars like Hippocrates and Galen were re-examined in light of new discoveries. One of the most significant figures in this movement was Andreas Vesalius, whose groundbreaking work in human anatomy helped challenge centuries of misconceptions about the human body. Vesalius conducted dissections and published detailed anatomical drawings, providing a more accurate understanding of human physiology than had been previously available. At the same time, the Renaissance saw the emergence of the scientific method, which encouraged physicians to base their treatments on observation, experimentation, and evidence rather than superstition or religious dogma. The work of pioneering scientists like Paracelsus and William Harvey, who discovered the circulation of the blood, marked a new era in medicine. These figures moved away from the traditional humoral theory of disease and began to develop a more rational, evidence-based approach to healthcare. The Renaissance laid the groundwork for the eventual emergence of modern medicine, but it took centuries before the full implications of the Black Death and other medieval plagues were understood in terms of germ theory, immunology, and the prevention of infectious diseases. While the Black Death brought devastation to Europe, it also forced medieval society to confront its limitations in understanding disease. The failure of traditional medical practices, combined with the suffering caused by the plague, prompted a slow but significant evolution in medical thinking. Quarantine measures, the earliest inklings of germ theory, and a shift toward hygiene and public health practices were all byproducts of the pandemic. Even though many of these ideas were not fully understood at the time, they laid the foundation for the medical advancements that would follow. By the time of the Enlightenment in the 18th century, the field of medicine had made great strides. The advent of the microscope allowed scientists to see microorganisms for the first time, providing concrete evidence of the invisible agents that cause disease. In the following centuries, the development of vaccines, antibiotics, and surgical techniques would revolutionize medicine, transforming it into the highly specialized field we know today. However, the legacy of medieval medicine remains with us. Many modern medical practices, such as the use of herbal remedies, surgery, and even quarantine, trace their origins to medieval times. The medieval approach to medicine, though rudimentary by today's standards, laid the foundation for future discoveries and innovations. The experience of the Black Death, in particular, demonstrated the necessity of medical research and the importance of empirical evidence in the treatment of disease. It also highlighted the critical need for public health measures, which would become central to medicine in the centuries to come. As we look back on the dark days of medieval medicine, we are reminded of how far we have come in our understanding of health, disease, and the human body. Yet the Black Death and other pandemics of the time also serve as a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the ever-present threat of disease. While modern medicine has made incredible progress, we are still vulnerable to new and emerging pathogens, and the lessons learned from medieval medicine continue to shape how we respond to health crises today. As we reach the final chapter of this exploration into the hidden world of medieval medicine, it becomes clear that the past, with all its superstitions, misguided treatments, and rudimentary practices, has had a profound influence on modern medicine. While the medieval period is often regarded as a time of ignorance in healthcare, it laid the groundwork for the advances that would follow. From the earliest rudimentary surgeries to the eventual understanding of contagion, the road to modern medical practice was long, paved with both failures and breakthroughs. The medieval approach to disease, though flawed, has helped shape how we respond to health crises in the present day. The Black Death in particular was a pivotal moment in the history of medicine. The plague's ravaging impact on Europe not only exposed the vulnerabilities of medieval medicine, but also sparked some of the earliest efforts at disease prevention and public health measures. Quarantine practices, though rudimentary, were among the first steps toward a more systematic approach to controlling epidemics. The idea of separating the sick from the healthy, even if based on trial and error rather than scientific understanding, demonstrated the beginnings of what would later be known as epidemiology. However, it would take centuries for the full implications of the plague to be understood. The concept of germ theory, which would revolutionize medicine in the 19th century, was still a distant dream during the medieval period. The idea that invisible microorganisms could cause disease was not widely accepted until the work of scientists like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch in the 19th century. Yet the early efforts during the Black Death to separate the sick and limit exposure to contaminated environments laid the foundation for modern public health strategies. Today, quarantine and isolation remain key tools in preventing the spread of infectious diseases, as seen in the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Similarly, the medieval reliance on herbal remedies, though often ineffective, contributed to the rich tradition of natural medicine that persists today. Many of the herbs and plants used by medieval healers, such as garlic, lavender, and chamomile, are still used in modern herbal medicine and are the subject of ongoing research for their potential medicinal properties. While medieval herbalists may not have understood the chemical compounds that made these plants effective, they laid the foundation for future discoveries in pharmacology. In fact, many modern pharmaceutical drugs have their origins in plants used by medieval healers. For example, the pain-relieving properties of willow bark used in the Middle Ages to treat aches and fever were later found to be due to the presence of salicylic acid, which forms the basis of aspirin. The use of surgery also evolved from medieval practices, though often with significant limitations. Barber surgeons, who were the primary practitioners of surgery during the medieval period, laid the groundwork for modern surgical practices. Though their tools were rudimentary and their understanding of anatomy limited, The basic principles of surgery, such as the importance of sterilization, even though they didn't know why, and the need for careful cutting have remained central to modern surgery. The development of antiseptic techniques and the discovery of anesthesia were key advancements that improved the safety and efficacy of surgeries, but the principles of surgical intervention first practiced by medieval barber surgeons remain in place today. Despite the progress made in the centuries following the medieval period, there is still much to learn from the history of medicine. One of the key lessons of medieval medicine, particularly in the wake of pandemics like the Black Death, is the importance of scientific inquiry and the willingness to challenge prevailing theories. Medieval medicine, for all its flaws, was not stagnant. Over time, practitioners began to question the ancient texts they relied on, and some even started to experiment with new methods of diagnosis and treatment. This spirit of inquiry, though initially limited, set the stage for the Renaissance and the eventual birth of modern science. Perhaps one of the most important lessons from medieval medicine is the role of public health and hygiene in disease prevention. The lack of understanding about germs and sanitation during the medieval period led to widespread illness and death. However, the Black Death prompted early efforts at cleaning the streets, improving waste disposal and controlling the movement of people to prevent the spread of disease. Today we know that good sanitation and hygiene practices are critical to preventing infectious diseases. Hand washing, vaccination, and proper waste management are just a few of the modern practices that emerged from the historical need to control epidemics. The ongoing battle against diseases like COVID-19 has reinforced the importance of these basic public health measures, highlighting the continued relevance of practices first explored in the medieval period. Moreover, the role of religious and spiritual beliefs in medicine, though often criticized, serves as a reminder of the human need for hope and meaning in times of suffering. During the Black Death, people sought solace in prayer, pilgrimages, and religious relics, hoping to find protection from the disease. While these practices were not medically effective, they provided comfort to people who were facing overwhelming death and despair. Today, while modern medicine has replaced much of the spiritual and mystical approaches to healing, there are still instances where faith and hope play an important role in the healing process. The intersection of science and spirituality in medicine continues to be an area of exploration, as many people turn to both medical treatments and faith-based practices in their times of need. As we move further into the 21st century, we must continue to build on the lessons of the past. While medieval medicine was undeniably flawed, it was also a stepping stone in the development of modern healthcare. The trials and errors of medieval practitioners paved the way for the scientific advancements that have revolutionized the treatment of disease and the understanding of the human body. But as we progress, we must also remember the importance of humility and self-reflection in the medical field. The history of medicine is one of constant change, and what is considered cutting edge today may one day be seen as outdated or even harmful. Looking back, we can see that medieval medicine, despite its shortcomings, was an integral part of the broader story of human survival and resilience. The doctors, healers, and even the common folk who relied on herbal remedies and spiritual beliefs were all part of a shared struggle to understand and combat disease. In many ways, the medieval period's approach to health was a precursor to the scientific revolution that would follow. It was a time of great uncertainty and fear, but it was also a time when the seeds of modern medicine were sown. As we confront our own health challenges in the present day, we must keep in mind that our understanding of medicine is constantly evolving. Just as medieval doctors worked with limited knowledge but made significant contributions to the eventual rise of modern medicine, so too will future generations look back at our current practices and see areas for improvement. What remains unchanged, however, is the desire to understand disease, to heal, and to preserve life. It is this fundamental drive that connects us to our medieval ancestors, who, despite their limited understanding of the human body, work tirelessly to ease suffering and save lives. In the end, the legacy of medieval medicine is not one of failure but of progress, a story of trial, error, and ultimately survival. The history of medicine is, at its core, the history of humanity's attempt to conquer the forces of nature and disease. And while we have come a long way since the medieval period, the journey continues as we build on the lessons of the past and push forward into the future of medical discovery. The term chivalry often conjures images of noble knights on horseback clad in shining armour, embarking on heroic quests to rescue damsels in distress or to uphold justice and honour. However, the reality of chivalry in the medieval period was far more complex, rooted in a mixture of noble ideals, military obligations, and the social realities of medieval Europe. Chivalry was not simply a code of conduct for knights, but a system of values and expectations that influenced every aspect of medieval society, from warfare to marriage and even the arts. In its origins, it was less about the romanticised ideals of knightly honour and more about the practicalities of warfare and the feudal system. The roots of chivalry can be traced back to the early medieval period, particularly in the context of the rise of feudalism and the warrior aristocracy. As the Roman Empire crumbled and Europe descended into the chaos of the Dark Ages, local lords and nobles began to form their own military forces to protect their lands from external threats, such as invading Vikings or Saracens. This warrior class, known as knights, was defined not just by their military prowess, but by their social position. Unlike common soldiers, knights were members of the nobility, and their role in society was deeply tied to their land holdings and their relationship to the king or higher lords. In the early days of the medieval period, the role of a knight was primarily focused on military service. They were heavily armoured, highly trained soldiers, often tasked with protecting their lord's territory, enforcing his will, and serving as his vassals in exchange for land or other rewards. As feudalism took hold in Europe, the bond between knights and their lords became more formalised, with oaths of loyalty and mutual obligation. Knights were expected to fight for their lord in times of war, and in return they were granted land, wealth, and a degree of social prestige. However, as Europe emerged from the turmoil of the Dark Ages and entered the High Middle Ages, the role of knights began to evolve. By the 12th century, chivalry began to take shape as a formalised code of conduct that went beyond the mere duties of warfare. The word chivalry itself comes from the French word chevalier, meaning horseman, reflecting the knightly class's strong association with horsemanship and mounted combat. The term chivalric code was used to describe a set of ethical guidelines that knights were expected to follow, although in practice these codes varied from region to region. The first codifications of chivalric ideals emerged during the 12th century, largely through the influence of literature and the growing influence of the Catholic Church. The epic tales of knightly adventures, such as those found in the Arthurian legends and the chansons de geste, songs of heroic deeds, helped shape the public perception of what it meant to be a knight. These stories, which were widely circulated in courts across Europe, portrayed knights as paragons of virtue, brave, honourable, and self-sacrificing figures who risked their lives for the protection of the weak and the pursuit of justice. These tales were designed to inspire and entertain, but they also served to promote a set of values that would later become associated with chivalry. At the same time, the Catholic Church played a critical role in shaping the development of chivalric ideals. The Church's influence on medieval society was immense, and its leaders saw the growing warrior class as a potential source of power and influence. In the early Middle Ages, the Church had a relatively ambivalent stance toward knights and warfare, but as the century progressed, the Church began to embrace the concept of holy warfare. The idea of knights fighting for God and defending Christendom began to gain prominence, particularly with the Crusades. The Crusades were a series of religious wars fought between Christians and Muslims for control of Jerusalem and other holy sites, and they played a pivotal role in solidifying the connection between chivalry and religious duty. The Church promoted the idea that knights were not merely warriors, but also defenders of the faith, tasked with protecting the Christian world from the forces of evil. This spiritual dimension of chivalry was formalised through the practice of knighthood, in which knights were often dubbed by a bishop or priest, symbolising the connection between their martial duties and their religious responsibilities. A knight's oath was often sworn before God, and they were expected to uphold not only the laws of their lord, but also the moral teachings of the church. This intertwining of religious and secular authority gave chivalry a unique position in medieval society, elevating knights to a higher moral standard than other members of the military. Despite the lofty ideals associated with chivalry, the reality of being a knight was far less glamorous. In practice, the life of a knight was often brutal and merciless. Warfare in the medieval period was violent, chaotic, and frequently fought with little regard for the rules of engagement. Knights, while expected to uphold the ideals of honour and justice, were often engaged in acts of pillaging, brutality, and exploitation. The code of chivalry may have prescribed protection for the weak, but in reality, knights often took advantage of their power to dominate peasants, pillage towns, and engage in petty squabbles with rival knights. The ideal of a knight as a noble protector was often at odds with the harsh realities of feudal warfare, where power was the ultimate currency. The concept of courtly love also played a significant role in the evolution of chivalry, adding an element of romance to the knightly code. Courtly love was a cultural ideal that emphasised the devotion of knights to ladies of noble birth. This romanticised notion of knightly devotion was often expressed through acts of service, where knights would undertake quests or perform feats of valour in honour of a lady. While this ideal was rooted more in literature and poetry than in real life, it contributed to the broader perception of knights as chivalrous figures devoted to honour, virtue, and the pursuit of romantic love. It also helped to shape the social structure of the medieval court, where the relationships between knights and noblewomen were idealised and romanticised. The rise of chivalry was also influenced by the increasing sophistication of medieval courts, particularly in France and England. As the power of monarchs grew, so too did the need for a well-organised, disciplined military force. The idea of a knight as a noble warrior became more formalised, and the expectations placed upon knights grew more stringent. By the 14th century, the concept of chivalry had expanded beyond the battlefield to encompass a broader set of social expectations, including loyalty, generosity, courtesy, and the defence of the weak. Knights were expected to be not just warriors, but also upstanding members of society who embodied the values of justice, honour, and piety. As the medieval period progressed into the Renaissance, chivalry began to lose its relevance in the face of changing military technology and the rise of centralised monarchies. The use of gunpowder and firearms diminished the role of the heavily armoured knight, and the increasing professionalisation of armies meant that the feudal system, and with it the knightly class, began to fade. By the 16th century, the ideals of chivalry were largely relegated to literature and courtly life, rather than being a practical guide for warriors. However, the legacy of chivalry continued to influence European society, especially in the realms of literature, art, and the concept of noble conduct. Despite its decline as a military code, the cultural influence of chivalry remained strong. The knights of the medieval world, with their sense of honour, loyalty, and devotion, continue to captivate the imagination of people today. The stories of King Arthur and the Round Table, the heroic deeds of the Crusaders, and the idealised figure of the knight in shining armour all continue to inspire our modern understanding of what it means to be noble, virtuous, and brave. In the next section, we will explore how the concept of chivalry evolved in later periods, particularly in the context of the Renaissance and beyond. How did these ideals adapt to the changing social and political landscapes of early modern Europe? And what remains of chivalry's legacy in the world today? By the time the Renaissance began to unfold in the 15th century, the medieval system of chivalry was undergoing significant transformation. While the ideals of knightly honour, courage, and courtly love continued to resonate in literature and courtly life, the real-world application of chivalric codes had diminished. The rise of gunpowder and firearms during the late Middle Ages had fundamentally altered the nature of warfare, making the heavily armoured knight less relevant on the battlefield. With the rise of centralized monarchies and professional armies, the feudal system, which had been the backbone of medieval society, began to weaken. Knights, once the backbone of European warfare, now found themselves sidelined in the face of changing military tactics and technologies. The waning importance of knights in the military sphere did not mean the end of chivalry's cultural influence, however. Instead, it evolved into a more symbolic and ceremonial role, one that was closely tied to the emerging ideals of nobility and aristocratic conduct. During the Renaissance, the concept of courtly virtue took centre stage in shaping the role of the nobleman, and chivalric values became entwined with the broader cultural movements of the time, including humanism and the concept of the courtier. Humanism, which placed a strong emphasis on the study of classical texts and the virtues of ancient Greece and Rome, influenced the way people viewed the ideals of knighthood. Renaissance scholars began to revive the teachings of ancient philosophers such as Aristotle, Cicero, and Plutarch, who extolled virtues like wisdom, courage, and honour. These virtues, many of which had been central to the medieval chivalric code, found a renewed expression in the Renaissance ideal of the perfect gentleman. The concept of the gentleman in the Renaissance was deeply influenced by chivalric ideals, but it was also shaped by new ideas of social grace, eloquence, and intellectual achievement. One of the most significant contributions to the Renaissance reimagining of chivalry came in the form of Baldassare Castiglione's The Book of the Courtier, written in 1528. This seminal work outlined the characteristics of the ideal nobleman or courtier, blending the traditional martial virtues of the knight with new expectations of intellectual refinement, manners, and grace. Castiglione's courtier was expected to be well versed in the arts of diplomacy, music, and literature, while also retaining the martial prowess and sense of honour that had defined the medieval knight. The Renaissance courtier was not just a warrior, but a man of culture, wisdom, and refinement, someone who embodied the fusion of classical and chivalric ideals. While the notion of the knight as a warrior on horseback began to fade, the concept of chivalric honour remained a cornerstone of aristocratic identity. Nobles, even if they no longer fought in battle as knights had done, still adhered to the principles of loyalty, bravery, and protection of the weak. These values continued to inform the social interactions within the courts of Renaissance Europe. The idea that noblemen had a responsibility to uphold justice and defend their honour was still a central tenet of aristocratic life, even as their role in direct combat diminished. In the context of warfare, however, chivalric ideals were slowly displaced by the growing importance of organised armies and professional soldiers. The early modern period saw the development of standing armies, where the role of the knight as an individual combatant was replaced by the soldier as part of a larger, more efficient military unit. The use of gunpowder, cannons, and firearms made the traditional knight's armour obsolete, and mounted knights gradually gave way to infantry and artillery as the dominant forces in battle. This shift in military tactics marked the end of the era in which chivalry was defined by combat prowess alone. However, while knights no longer dominated the battlefield, the idea of chivalric orders and the nobility's connection to military service persisted. During the Renaissance, a new type of chivalric order emerged: the Order of the Garter in England, the Order of St. John, and the Order of the Holy Ghost in France, for example. These orders were primarily ceremonial and religious in nature, but they continued to embody the ideals of chivalric virtue, loyalty to the crown, and defence of the Christian faith. Membership in these orders was a mark of high social standing, and the ceremonies surrounding their induction continued to reinforce the connection between nobility, honour, and service. In France, the concept of chivalric honour was intricately tied to the culture of honour that permeated aristocratic society. The French nobility maintained a highly structured social hierarchy, and the idea of honour, derived from chivalric codes, was a powerful motivator. Nobles were expected to defend their honour through personal duels, public displays of bravery, and upholding the principles of justice. Even as warfare became less personal and more mechanised, the rituals of duelling and the pursuit of personal honour continued to be associated with chivalric ideals. These practices reached their peak in the 17th and 18th centuries, when the French court saw the rise of the culture of honour and elaborate codes of conduct for the aristocracy. While chivalric ideals were evolving in Renaissance Europe, they were also being immortalised in the realm of literature and art. The works of authors such as Sir Thomas Malory in England, who wrote Le Morte d'Arthur, and the Spanish epic El Cid, helped to preserve the image of the chivalric knight as the ideal of nobility and virtue. These stories of knights, quests, and heroic deeds continued to shape the public imagination, even as the real-world function of knights in society changed. The medieval knight, with his sense of honour and duty, became a symbol of the noble virtues that were now being redefined in the courts of Europe. The Renaissance also marked the rise of the romantic knight in literature, a character who upheld the chivalric ideals of courage, honour, and love. The stories of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, which had been circulating in medieval Europe, were revived during the Renaissance and found new life in the literary culture of the time. These tales, which portrayed knights as paragons of virtue and self-sacrifice, continued to influence the way that chivalry was perceived by later generations. The medieval knight may have been a figure of military strength, but by the Renaissance, he had evolved into a symbol of virtue, romance, and the pursuit of moral excellence. As the Renaissance progressed into the early modern period, the ideals of chivalry began to fade from the battlefield, but remained deeply embedded in the cultural fabric of European society. The transformation of chivalry from a practical code for soldiers into a symbolic set of ideals for the aristocracy marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. The knights of the past were replaced by a new generation of courtiers, soldiers, and intellectuals, yet the legacy of chivalric honour endured in the values and virtues that continued to shape the behaviour of the nobility. As the modern age emerged, the concept of chivalry, while no longer central to the role of knights, continued to influence Western ideas of nobility, honour, and virtue. In literature, in art, and even in the social structures of European aristocracy, the echoes of chivalric ideals remained a powerful force. Yet as we move further into the modern era, we are left with the question, how does the legacy of chivalry influence our view of honour, nobility, and duty in today's world? Are these ideals still relevant, or have they become relics of a bygone age? In the next section, we will explore how chivalric ideals have been reinterpreted in modern times. How have they shaped our perceptions of leadership, heroism, and the ideals of nobility in contemporary society? As we look at the 21st century, it is clear that the ideals of chivalry have evolved, but they have not disappeared entirely. Chivalric concepts of honour, courage, and service continue to resonate, particularly in the realms of leadership, military service, and public life. However, these ideals have been reinterpreted in ways that reflect contemporary values, particularly in democratic societies that prioritise equality, individual rights, and justice. The evolution of chivalry from a medieval code for knights into a broader moral and ethical framework reveals much about how societies change while retaining certain core values. One of the most obvious modern remnants of chivalric ideals is seen in the military and law enforcement. The honour and duty that were central to the knightly code still serve as guiding principles for those in uniform today. Whether this is the oath a soldier swears to protect their country, or the commitment a police officer makes to uphold the law, the modern military and law enforcement agencies are direct heirs to the chivalric traditions of loyalty, bravery, and service. The idea that a soldier or officer must defend the helpless, fight for justice, and act honourably is a modern reinterpretation of chivalric values. Military leaders today still invoke chivalric ideals of courage, selflessness, and the protection of others when guiding their forces into action. The concept of heroism, which has roots in the medieval knight's role as defender of the weak, also continues to play a central role in modern society. The image of the heroic figure in literature, film, and even in real-world events is still very much influenced by the idea of the knightly hero. Whether it's the self-sacrificing soldier who risks their life for others, or the everyday person who performs an act of extraordinary courage, the idea that one should act with honour, bravery, and righteousness continues to define heroism. Modern superhero movies, for example, often portray characters who embody these knightly virtues, figures like Superman or Captain America, who not only fight evil, but do so with an unwavering sense of duty, morality, and honour. These modern heroes, though fictional, are symbolic of the values of chivalry that persist in popular culture. In politics and leadership, chivalric ideals have also been reinterpreted, though the emphasis on nobility and bloodline has long been abandoned. Leaders today are expected to embody principles of integrity, responsibility, and a sense of duty to their citizens, values that closely parallel the virtues that medieval knights were expected to uphold. Politicians and world leaders often invoke the language of chivalric honour when discussing their roles in protecting the vulnerable, promoting justice and ensuring peace. The modern understanding of leadership emphasises the protection of human rights and the well-being of the people, ideals that can trace their roots back to the chivalric concept of defending the weak and the powerless.